And then he proceeds to say, you know that God had a call to ministry on your life when you were younger, and that you've been running from that. And you've had your eyes fixed on the church when you need to have your eyes fixed on Jesus. And I just started crying. I was like, all right, like, let me just tell you what I prayed 2 hours ago, right?
Welcome to the Everywhere Podcast, a collection of interviews with leaders and pastors and everyday followers of Jesus who are living into the reality that Jesus changes everything, everywhere. Hey friends, welcome to the podcast. I'm Ryan. Today I have the privilege and honor of sitting down with somebody who has had a huge impact on me over the last couple of years. His name is Dale Schaeffer. Dale Schaeffer is currently the District Superintendent of the Florida District for the Church of the Nazarene and has served in various roles throughout the years at different churches and church plants. I think you'll love this conversation. Dale has a real heart for the mission of God and for pastors. He's got tons of great stories and wisdom and insight. I just loved this conversation, and I know you will too. Blessings to you. Let's check out the podcast. Well, good morning, Pastor Dale. How are you, sir?
Hey, Pastor Ryan, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for the invite to be a part of this conversation today, man. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. It's no mystery to those that at least know me, but for those that are listening or watching, you played a very pivotal role in my development and in my life at a very crucial time for me needing to just kind of grow up and kind of look at some other areas where my life needed to grow and kind of move forward in ministry and continue to grow and what the Lord had for me. And so you've always had a special place in my heart just for being somebody that was always so willing to invest in a really crucial time in my life. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that means a lot. Thanks, Ryan. And I'm glad I get to play a little part in, a bit part in people's stories. It's kind of fun.
It is. It's always a good thing and an honor. So with that said, man, let's dive right in. What's your salvation story, man? How'd you come to know Christ?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I was just sharing this this past weekend at a training we were doing on the district for people that are trying to respond to the call of God or help others respond to God's call in their life. I grew up in a home that was basically a Christian home. My parents came into faith when I was like 3 years old. So both of them had been disconnected from the church and had been going through some relational difficulties, just some early life difficulties you have when you're newly married and got your first kid at home. And my dad had a coworker who had invited my parents over to their house and had talked to them about the challenges they were facing. And this coworker helped lead my dad to faith in Christ. He basically said, hey, I was in that space too at one time, and I gave my life to Christ, and it made all the difference. Wow. And so really from the time I was like 3 on, my family was deeply embedded in the church, in the Church of the Nazarene particularly. So while my parents hadn't been going to church, my mom's grandmother was a part of the original group that helped to start the Church of the Nazarene in Sturgis, Michigan. They had,
wow.
Kind of a cool story. She had gotten connected with a little tent meeting that had happened there in like the early, I want to say it was like the early 20s, or maybe early 30s. And they started like over the top of a Kroger grocery store. And that was where they met to get going. And so she had some history in the Church of the Nazarene. And so my mom had a little bit of memory in the Church of the Nazarene. And so that's how we came in that way. So I was raised in the church, attended, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and always was really sensitive to spiritual things, like just maybe a little too sensitive, right? Our pastor, awesome guy, John Shoup, he had a little bit of like Jesus is coming soon kind of tone to his teaching. And so Revelation was a common place that you'd go. I must have went to the altar to get saved like a dozen times, maybe more, maybe 24 times growing up.
There you go.
And so I definitely had prayed a prayer of salvation, but it was more like I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to get left behind, right?
Right.
I don't know if anyone watching this ever saw those, like not the Left Behind movies, but the Thief in the Night movies. This goes way back. Thief in the Night.
I've heard of these.
Oh man, like Google it, YouTube Thief in the Night, right? and they're all this rapture kind of theology stuff. And one of the scenes in it, they like get a guillotine, right? And people are being martyred for their faith in Christ, and they're being guillotined. And so my perspective was, I don't want to get guillotined, so I want to get saved, so I get to go, right? I want to go. I don't want to have to stay and get guillotined. So that was kind of my initial salvation prayer. I don't really know that it took, though, man. I don't know that it took.
You and Kirk Cameron just hanging out,
That's exactly right. So when I was in high school, I have a middle sister, and she was a teen mom, and just incredible gal. And the church did not respond with as much grace as you might hope a church might respond. I would say, pastor was supportive, but there were a few people in the congregation who were less than supportive, and less than helpful, and said less than helpful things. And I just remember being really troubled by how the church responded to that circumstance. And I remember saying to myself, if this is how the church is going to treat people when they're in their most deep point of need, I don't want to be a part of that. I just can't be a part of something like that. That does not seem like the body of Christ. And so I walked away from the Lord and away from the church for about 3.5 years. Kind of went into, all the things that you do when you're 17, 18, 19, 20 and away from the Lord, right? And that was my trajectory, right? Lots of cutting class, not going to the college classes I was signed up for in graphic design, staying out late, partying with friends, all that stuff. And it just was really empty, right? So I'm like 20 years old. It was January, like middle of January, 1995. And I was living at my parents' house, and I'd cut class that morning, been out hanging out with friends the night before, probably was a little hungover that morning, if I remember right. And I was sitting in the living room, and I'm watching The Price is Right. And I'm just saying, your life is going nowhere when you're 20 years old and you're sitting in your parents' living room and you're watching the Showcase Showdown, listening to Bob Barker remind you to have your pet spayed or neutered, right? Like, life is going nowhere, man.
That's the best.
And it wasn't that I was going nowhere. I had a job offer to go start doing some graphic design for a company up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was trying to make a decision whether I'd take it or not.
Right.
And I was troubled because I knew that God had something more for me. Like it just felt like it was short of what God had for me. Right. Not that pastoral ministry is more important than someone being a graphic designer, but that for me, graphic design would have been less than God's best for me. And so, Bob Barker does his thing, and I prayed a prayer in my parents' living room. I got on my knees at like their sofa, right? In the long shag 70s carpet, that they hadn't had replaced in 20 years, right? And I kneeled at the sofa, the one that you got like the plastic on, right? And I prayed like a 30-second prayer. And I remember praying it very clearly. God, if you're real, show me that you're real, and I'll follow you the rest of my life. Show me today. Show me the guys I'm running with are bad news. Show me that the direction I'm headed is not what you have for me vocationally, and that you've still got some kind of call to ministry on my life, because I'd sensed that like in junior high school.
Okay.
And it was like a 30-second prayer. And sure enough, like I got done praying that. About 30 minutes later, my dad came home for lunch, and we had lunch together. He worked at the high school, so very close to the house where my parents lived. And we shared lunch together. He left the house, got back in his truck to go back to work, and was gone maybe like 3-4 minutes, and comes back in the house. He'd turned his car around and come back to the house, and he comes in and he's crying. Like his eyes are tear filled. And we're standing in the kitchen. I'll never forget it. Like the dining room side of the kitchen. And he looks at me and he says, Dale, the Holy Spirit would not let me go back to work today until I talk to you about where your life is headed. Now, for the last 3.5 years, my parents had not once mentioned to me my lack of church attendance, the partying I was doing, the people I was running, they'd never once did they just love me and prayed for me. And then he proceeds to say, the guys you're running with are bad news. Like, you guys aren't doing anything good or constructive with your lives. That God had a call to ministry on your life when you were younger, and that you've been running from that. And you've had your eyes fixed on the church when you need to have your eyes fixed on Jesus. And I just started crying. I was like, all right, like, let me just tell you what I prayed 2 hours ago. Right. And sure enough, like, that was it. That did it for me. That was a reaffirmation of my salvation. It was a sanctification, full surrender. It was acceptance of a call to ministry. And like, it all kind of convened in that moment for me. That's that.
That's that. Listen to you. Oh my word. Wow. That is amazing. That's powerful. So your parents didn't talk to you at all about that stuff. They just kind of were there supportive, praying for you. Were you open to the fact, were you dialoguing with them at least, that you not sure if I believe in any of this? Nothing?
No, we'd had really zero spiritual conversations. Any spiritual conversation, I'm sorry, we didn't have any spiritual conversation about the state of my spiritual state. Okay. I had a lot of spiritual conversations about my criticism of the church.
Sure.
And the people of God. Like, I was very opinionated about the people of God being hypocrites, unloving, judgmental, hurtful, causing more harm than doing good. I was very critical. And my parents' only response really to that was basically like, listen, that's not everyone. That's just some people. And that was about the extent of our conversations over that period of time. Yeah, not a lot.
What would you say now to somebody who, because I'm thinking of people that I've had lunch with recently who, they have the same hangups. This is an ongoing thing that a lot of people deal with. What would you say to that person now, looking back, knowing that's what you went through? Well, what would be some of the hooks that you would the seeds that you would plant in their heart and in their mind to kind of nudge them towards understanding the reality that just because you see a bad painting, it doesn't mean all art is bad.
Yeah, that's it. A few things that I would say. One is, be really careful what you allow to happen to your heart during this time. No one else can make your heart hard. You can harden your heart, but no one else can make that happen. You have to choose what you're going to allow to have happen to your heart. So take responsibility for your heart. You aren't responsible for what someone said or what they did or the way they treated others, but you are responsible for what you let it do to you. You have full agency over what you allow to have happen to your heart. So don't let your heart get hard to the things of God. And I think exactly like you said, while we can all pick out examples of Christians who have been less than loving, who have been hurtful, we all can pick out examples of followers of Christ who have been nothing but compassionate, nothing but grace-filled, nothing but Jesus with skin on. Yes. And so don't allow your perspective of the church to become skewed by those who maybe don't represent Christ well. Like, recognize you in your spirit, that's not who Christ is. In your spirit, that's not a faithful witness, because you have seen a faithful witness and you know what the church should be. And so fix your gaze on the followers who actually embody what Christ is like. And then for those, and for those that act badly as Christians, I think anytime anyone acts in a way that is troubling to us, we have to ask ourselves, like, why would a sane, rational person respond the way that they're responding, right? Attribute the best possible motive to the individual and try to get yourself in the space where you can understand why they would do what they would do. So, back to my circumstances, why would a sane, rational person, desire for my father not to be able to serve on a church board when our family's going through a situation like that? A sane, rational person might have a really legalistic understanding or fundamentalist understanding of the scriptures and might say, well, look, the scriptures say if you can't lead your house, then how can you help lead the house of God? So I can see how if you have a very fundamentalist perspective that you could be in that space. And I don't judge them. They may have been discipled in a very fundamentalist tradition, right? And asking them to shift that framework in a moment, in an instant, man, that's a hard thing to do. Most people I know that have found themselves reconstructing their faith, it hasn't happened in a moment. It's happened over a season, right? Over several seasons of time. And so if there's someone who needs to have their framework reconstructed, that's probably not going to happen in a moment. And so I need to give them some grace for why they have that perspective. So not always easy, but I think it helps me to try to understand the other person's perspective. I don't think it's just because they're mean, nasty people that are trying to cause harm.
That's good. That's good. Charity is something that we are lacking in today's world, you know?
Oh man, if all of us could simply get to the place where we attribute the best of intentions, whether there are the best of intentions behind something, and attribute the best of intentions and try to understand how someone could act that way if it really was best intentioned, we can help ourselves.
Oh my gosh. It could be a real gift. All right. So from there, you have this call to ministry, sanctification experience. Like you're getting it all in one.
Yeah, it all is like it's full meal deal all at
Yeah.
once, right? I didn't a la carte. I didn't a la carte my spiritual growth there. It was like all at once. Yeah.
So then what happens there? Do you continue on with your graphic design? Like what's the track after that?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I went and met with the pastor of the church. So like one of the things that really helped me to understand how do you deal with Christians that behave badly was my parents. Like they didn't leave the church. In the midst of all of that, they stayed in the church and they served the church faithfully. And they're still in that same church today.
Wow.
You know, just incredibly impressed. Like, I'm like, hey, if stop church hopping and look at my parents and just kind of follow their example. Right. Do that. That's what Christians do. Anyway, so I went to the pastor of my home church. And I just sat down and I said, hey, here's what's happened. You know that I had a call to ministry. I've kind of been running from it and I'm ready to kind of respond to it. What do I do? Because I had no idea. I'm like, how do you prepare for ministry? I have no idea. And he said, well, you could go to Olivet and it's a good school. It's the regional school from Michigan. And he says, but too many people know you there. You got a rep, man, and you probably might want to go someplace else.
There you go.
So he said, my son, he had a son that went into ministry. He says, my son went to Mid-America. And I'd encourage you to go to Mid-America. He had a good experience with the religion department there. And I think they'd be a help to you. And then the second thing is it would move you far enough away from some of your influences that maybe you might stick with this and not face some of the temptations you'd face if you live closer to home. And that's really good advice.
Yeah.
And then the third piece of it was, he said, and I never went to seminary, but I always wished I'd completed a master's degree. And I always wished that I'd gone to seminary because I think, and his way of putting it was, I think that God had other responsibilities that he would have wanted me to be trusted with. But because I didn't have that education, it made it difficult for me to be able to serve in those ways. And he said, I really would hope that you'd position yourself to be able to be used in multiple ways. And so that made a ton of sense to me, like on all three counts, right? Like go someplace where you get a fresh start, go someplace where you're not being confronted with all the people you hung out with all the time, go someplace where the move to seminary is like moving across town, not moving across the country.
Yeah.
Because I was a little bit older. I'd taken 2 years off of high school and was coming into Mid-America. I graduated at 17, so I was coming in basically like 1 year older than the rest of the freshman class when I came in. I guess 2 years older than the rest of the freshman class when I came in. So anyway, that thought of like moving once was appealing to me. So yeah, I went to Mid-America, got connected to a Youth for Christ ministry. Like they came in, Kansas City had a great Youth for Christ ministry. And the leader for Youth for Christ, Mike King, came in and met with our Christian ministries class and talked about the work they were doing. And they wanted to start a club in Shawnee, Kansas, like a junior high school club, after school Youth for Christ club. And they were looking for volunteers to come and work it. And me and my buddy Thad Cole who were both freshmen said, hey, we'll go work that and help you out. And so we started working and serving at this Youth for Christ club on, like, I don't know, it was Tuesday or Thursday. It was a midweek thing. And like, it started out with like 3-4 kids and grew to like 70, 80 kids in the backyard of this house in a neighborhood. And it kind of gave me the bug for youth ministry and working with people that were disconnected from faith, disconnected from the church, and maybe had skepticism towards the church. Like, my past experience and then my early ministry experiences really lit a fire in me for helping people who were skeptical about faith and skeptical about the church renew their faith in God, or find faith in God, and ultimately find faith and renew their faith in the church. And that was very formative. My own personal pain, and then those first couple of years of ministry experience there. I mean, I can go on about what we did in Kansas City and church planning there and all of that, but that was a really formative space for us.
Fantastic. And then you did eventually move on to church planting and everything, and planting a church. Talk about that. What was that experience?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So like I said, my heartbeat was for those that were like marginalized from the church, or didn't have experience with the church, or, had ill will towards the church, or
Sure.
doubts towards the church. Along that same time, my wife and I got married about halfway through my college years. And she had kind of a different past too, right? Like, my life had gotten off track. Hers had. Well, she'd been a teen mom as well. And so, trying to figure out where we fit in a fairly conservative church, right? I mean, the Church of Nazarene is a pretty conservative church. And so I'm studying for the ministry. She's got her story, I got my story. And we went to a number of Nazarene churches in Kansas City. And to put it kindly, they didn't know what to do with us.
Okay.
I mean, they just didn't know what to do. It's like, hey, that's great. You got a call to ministry. You're going to school. You're married. You guys got a kid. Like, it just felt we did not fit nicely into the college student category, and we didn't fit nicely into the young married category. Okay. And so they couldn't figure out how to like use us in ministry or what to do. So we're in like a couple of churches and really struggling. Like, where do we fit? Mm. And our neighbors in Marriage Housing at the time, Bill and Tracy Gue, amazing people. They were going to a church plant on the north side of town, way up by the airport. It's like an hour away from Olathe, where Mid-America is. And they said, you should come with us. And my wife, I was working on that particular Sunday. It was like going in the Christmas season. It was this time of year. I think it's like the Sunday before Christmas. So like this coming Sunday, basically. Yes. They invited her to go to the Christmas service, and I had to work that day. And she went with them, and she came back and she said, Dale, like, this is it. This is the place. Like, they were welcoming, accepting. It was a church plant that met in a junior high school cafeteria, kind of contemporary music, and just an incredibly grace-filled space. You could just pick it up when you got there. And she's like, you got to go. And so I started going there with her, and we landed at a church called Northland Community, which was a church plant that was pastored by Larry McCain, who's your superintendent now.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we got there, and just to put it simply, they knew what to do with us.
That's a really interesting phrase, isn't it? Don't you find that there's a lot of churches that just don't know what to do with people? Yeah. And then when they do, we might have to dive into that a little bit later. But
yeah, I think a lot of churches are kind of built for cookie cutter Christians.
Sure.
And there's just not a lot of cookie cutter people in the world. Mm-hmm. And so if people don't fit your framework of what it looks like to be a Christian, you don't know what to do with them, because they don't fit in any of your boxes, any of your roles. And so they don't find their place. And if a church can create space that is, I'm like, I want a church on the island of misfit toys, man. Like, I want that. That's the church I want. And so anyway, they knew what to do with this. And Dr. McCain gave me an opportunity to serve as the NMI president at the church. So we started teaching a youth Sunday school class. and we had opportunity to lead, and that all really accelerated my interest, not only in reaching people who just were disconnected from the church, reaching youth, but in church planting, because I didn't know you could plant a church. Right. I mean, it didn't strike me. Every church I'd seen, it already existed.
Right, you
I had
grew up
no
in an
idea
established church, and
I
okay.
had no idea you could just go start a church. Like that was a thing. And so I'm like, you can start a church, and you can start it with a purpose to reach a certain group of people. I'm like, this is great. I want to do that. And so Steph and I started to feel like God might be calling us to church planting, to do church for people that maybe don't fit in the established church. And so around that time, we went to Keith Wright, who was the superintendent in Kansas City at the time, and said, "Hey, I think we might have a call to plant. Would you assess us as church planters?" And this was a great conversation. So I'm sitting at the seminary in the cafeteria at the time. They don't have a cafeteria anymore, I don't think, but they had a cafeteria at the time. And I'm sitting with Dr. Wright, and he's interviewing me to support us to go get assessed to plant. And he looks at me and he says, "Now you and your wife tithe, right?" And here's the thing. I thought that every pastor tithe. I thought that every Christian tithe. I'm like, how can you be a Christian and not tithe? And then how could you be a pastor and not tithe? I don't know how this is even possible, right? So I'm making a joke of this thing.
Yeah.
I look at him and I said, well, we try to do what we can, but my wife likes to shop. And I'm completely joking. And he does not take it as a joke. And he looks back at me and he says, "Well, there will be no minister on this district who doesn't tithe." "Yes, sir. There will not be."
There will not
like,
be.
No, I was joking, man. I'm totally joking. Yes, we tithe. Yeah, like I work outside of the church. So like this whole time, my job in employment is in banking. I'm working in banking to support myself and my family while I'm going to seminary and doing my undergraduate. And so I had a good job in banking. My wife was working full time in like administrative assistant work. And so we had means, worked hard, but we had means anyway. But yeah, that was the question. So he has us assessed as church planners, and we go to a church planter assessment. And I'm like, this is great. It was like The Apprentice for church planting.
There you go.
Right. I mean, and I'm like, one of my strength finders is competition. And so if you come into an assessment center, it's like we sat down and I'm going to show my dysfunction here, and someone's going to judge me and condemn me, and we're recording this, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, this is great. This is great. Someone's going to soundbite this, and it'll go all over the place. It'll be awesome. If any, I don't know. Anyway, so we get to the assessment center, and there's like a dozen couples, maybe 10. I think there's 10 couples who are being assessed to plant a church. And they have you kind of meet people, and then they break you up into two teams. And in these two teams, then work together like a launch team for a church plant, and they have to come up with a plan to plant a church in a community. And they give you the demographics for the community, and you've got like 2 days to come up with the plan, and then you present the action plan and name the church, all the steps you're going to take. It's great. It really is like The Apprentice kind of thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. And so we're getting into the room, we're getting into the time where they're going to break us into groups. And I look at Steph and I said, okay, so if you were going to build a team, who would you want on your team here? And she's like, so and so and so and so. I'm like, yeah, and I would like so and so over here. And I said, in a minute here, I'd heard what they said they were going to do is have us break into teams. I'm like, if they give us the ability to build our own team and don't put us on a team, I'm going to go after this person, and you're going after that person and that person.
Nice.
And we're gonna build the dream team here.
That's awesome.
And so sure enough, they gave us permission to build the team. And they said, hey, just figure out who's on your team, like come up with like one group of 5, one group of 4. And Steph and I were like on it. We immediately went to our 2 targets and recruited them to the team. And so we formed a team real quick, and it was a great team. It was a lot of fun. And one of the things that we did, we actually took the project seriously. So like they gave us, the community they gave us was Elgin, Illinois. So it's up by you.
Hey, Elgin, yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, hey, you got to plant a church in Elgin, Illinois, and gave us all the demographics. So we're like calling the high school. We're calling the junior high school. We're calling the community centers. We're like, hey, we're planting a church in your community, and we're wondering if we can rent from you, what the cost would be, what the process is. So we get all the details. By the end of the conversation, we've got the high school online to rent to us if we want to. So we took it very, very seriously. And it was just so much fun. And they gave us feedback. And at the end of it, they approved us. And at the time, they used to do it this way, that you could get an approval with no conditions, which is like, you're ready to go plant a church right now, right? And then they could give you an approval with conditions. And they would put qualifications on things you needed to do before you go, right? Or as you are going, you need to do these things. They could give you a non-approval, but a come back and see us again in 2 years or 4 years, right? Like, you need to develop in these areas, but like, you should not go do this right now. Right. And then they could give you you should never plant a church. You could get you should never plant a church. Like, ministry might be for you, but church planting is not for you, right? They're not assessing your ability to do ministry. They're just assessing your ability to plant a church right now. And so their assessment on us was like, you probably could plant a church, but before you go, you need to do these 3 things. And so the 3 things they gave us were, you shouldn't parachute drop. You need a parent church. So you need to have a parent church that will sponsor you. Secondly, you need a launch team, so that not only a sponsor church, but you're going to need a team of people around you. So it's going to need to be a team that's willing to send people, or a church that's willing to send people to help you plant, probably in a nearby town. And then the third thing you need is you need experience in a church plant. You're getting that now, but you need ground up experience. So before you go plant, you need to go help someone else plant, not that's already planted. Basically, you need to go be Joshua and hold someone else's hands up for a season before you get into this and you expect someone else to hold your hands up. That's probably some of the best advice I've ever gotten in the ministry.
That's awesome.
Like, before you go do anything and you expect that someone else is going to help you do it, if you haven't helped someone else to do what you're needing others to help you with, you haven't earned the right for other people to help you do what you feel called to do. You need to go do that for someone else. And so our step out of that was my friend Dave Thornhill, who pastors like Indy West Side now. We were in seminary together, and he was doing a replant in like inner city Kansas City. And he asked us, not Kansas City, Kansas. So that's like the white and Hispanic side of Kansas City Metro, right? The Missouri side is African American. The Kansas side is like white and Hispanic for the most part. It's very segregated city, incredibly segregated city, segregated by the state line in the river.
Wow.
And so he's on the Kansas side, and we came in with him to this little church that had like 17 people at it, bullet hole through the front door, because nothing says your kids are safe and welcome here like a bullet hole through the front door of the church.
Right on, man.
And so we helped him replant that church for about 1.5 years. And then he felt called to plant a church. Jaron Rahl was pastoring Shawnee, Church of the Nazarene at the time. And Jaron and the church there felt led to plant a church in West Shawnee. So it was a growing suburb. And there was like 2 churches out there, a big Baptist church and a Catholic church. And that was it. And like 40,000 people. And I kid you not, that's all the churches that were out there.
Oh, man.
It was insane. Yeah. And so they felt called to plant a church out there. And Dave had a conversation with Jaron, and they agreed that, hey, this might work. And so Dave left to go be the church planter at Shawnee, and we stayed behind to help kind of finish things up at New Horizons, the church plant. And ultimately we merged it with First Spanish Church. And that, because the community was shifting demographic wise, right?
Yeah.
And so that was fun to be a part of that. And then we went out with Dave to help him plant in West Shawnee. And so we were there for like 9 months. And then I was just about done at seminary. I think I had like 12 classes or something, or 12 hours left to finish up. And I got a call from Greg Mason, who was pastoring in Pekin, Illinois at the time. I didn't know where Pekin was. It was like middle of nowhere, central Illinois. But it's a church of like 400 people. I mean, it's a good, strong church.
Yeah.
And he called and said they're looking for a youth pastor and someone who could help them plant a church. And Grow Magazine had just done kind of a story on Grace Point, the church that we were helping plant. And they'd mentioned like the staff there, and they'd mentioned me. And that's how Greg had gotten my name, was like through that. And he's like, hey, I'm going to call this guy. And so we interviewed there, went on staff for 2 years as youth pastor with intention that we would help put the plan together to plant the church, but not to be the church planter. It was going to be like a campus. This is in like the early 2000s, but it was going to be a campus of the Pekin First Church in a neighboring town called Morton, like 10, 15 minutes away. And about 2.5 years in, we started helping him build a team that could plant this campus, plant this church. And the thought was that we'd do the 2 services in Pekin in the morning and then do like a 1 o'clock in the afternoon or an evening service over in Morton. That was the thought. And the hard part was, in my spirit, I felt like, I think I'm supposed to plant this church. Like, I think I'm supposed to do this.
Yeah.
But the Spirit hadn't given me like the freedom to say that. Right.
Right.
I think we would all be a lot better off if when the Spirit prompts us and makes us aware of something, that just because the Spirit's prompted us about something, we shouldn't say anything about it until the Spirit gives us the permission to open our mouth.
Nice.
That would serve us all a lot better. And so I didn't say anything about it, just prayed on it. And Greg one day had went over to help a friend out and do something at his church in the afternoon, like to do a special service for him in the afternoon in a neighboring town. And he called me in his office the next day and he says, Dale, I need to talk to you. I'm like, what? He says, I went over to help Dave out the other day over in Sunnyland. And as I was driving across the railroad tracks to cross into Sunnyland, the Holy Spirit said to me, Greg, you're not going to plant this church. Dale is.
Oh, there you go.
And so he humbly, and this was a hard thing for him to do because he wanted to plant it. He humbly, open-handedly said, here you go do this. And I want to say we force things way more than we need to in the church.
Oh, man.
The Spirit can be trusted and is faithful and will work out all the timing and stuff. If we'll just do what we're supposed to do, be faithful with what's in front of us, the Spirit can be trusted with all the other stuff. And so that's how we ended up planting BridgeWay. So for 2 years, a year and a half, I did both jobs. I was the youth pastor at Pekin First and church planter at BridgeWay in Morton. So I led the youth group on Wednesday night and ran the retreats and camps and all of that. And then also preached on Sunday morning and led the church plant. And I did that for about a year and a half until I had a nervous breakdown. And I'm not kidding.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Like panic, anxiety disorder, all of that. It was just too much. Right.
How old were you at that time?
I want to say I would have been like 30, 29, 30. I think I was 30 at the time I was starting to have the anxiety. And that was related. The youth group was like 100 kids. Church plant was about 100. And trying to do both of those was just too much. I was working like 120-hour weeks, getting 4 hours of sleep a night sometimes. And I had, we had 3 kids. And I was trying to finish seminary.
Oh, dude, giving me anxiety. Listen.
Yeah. So, I had to write a written understanding on how to make my exit from Pekin First and bring a new youth pastor in there and do that all in a timely manner. But we got the church off the ground, started with 17 people in a borrowed gym, man. I mean, the Pekin First gym hosted our first gathering, and I'll never forget. We did an interest meeting in our backyard. This is like, I'm rewinding here. We did an interest meeting Labor Day weekend in our backyard. We have 50 people from the church come out and say, hey, I might want to help with this. I'm ecstatic. I'm like, yeah, this thing's going to go, right?
Sure.
And then like a couple weeks later, we did a Sunday night interest meeting where we're going to start building this launch team, and 17 people showed up. And I thought, all right. And I'm telling you, it wasn't like the people that I thought were going to help us build this church.
Okay.
So it was my family. It was a retired pastoral couple, Mac and Shirley Clark. And I love our retired ministers. But remember, I was a 28-year-old youth pastor.
Yeah.
And I did not have some of the maturity that the Lord has helped me with over the last 20 years, right? And I thought, how are we going to plant a church with a retired couple that pastored in a traditional Nazarene church?
Oh my, yeah.
And then in the room was a lady in the church, Betty Scott, who loves the Lord and loves kids. But, might not have been the best fit for the rock and roll kind of church plant, reaching non-church people that I thought, because she kind of growing up around the church.
Sure.
And then there was a gal that sang in the choir that showed up. And I thought, what, choir singing gal? Like, this isn't a fit. And her husband was an atheist. And I thought, I just don't know. And in the room that night was another couple that lived out in the community where we were going. That was good. Had a couple of kids. That was good. But they didn't serve anywhere in the existing church. And I thought, well, they don't serve anywhere. How are we going to use them? And no one that had musical ability showed up. So, what are we going to do for the music front? Another lady that night was Helen Hundemer. She just passed away like a month ago. She was 81 or 82 at the time. And yeah, she passed away. She was like 97 or 90.
I was gonna say, how old is she? Wow.
Oh yeah, she was almost 100 when she passed. Wow. And she shows up and she wanted to help with cafe and all the morning stuff. And I'm like,
80-something year old,
help me with my cafe at my young hip church plant that's going to reach all these people disconnected from church. And then there were 3 teenagers who just didn't want to go to Sunday night service, that were from my youth group that came. And I just thought, how in the world are we going to plant a church with the folks in this room? I was so judgmental and so critical, and I had no imagination. I had no imagination for what God might do and through who he might do it.
Wow.
And so just real quick on that, people in that room. So Mac and Shirley Clark, they're still in that church plant today. They immediately started listening to rock and roll Christian worship music. And they were like, we are going to love this, and we are going to support this. And we're going to be like surrogate grandparents to Pastor Dale and to his family and to his kids. And I can't tell you how many times they just picked up the slack for us when we didn't have any family around. And Shirley still serves as a part-time office administrator for the church. She knows everyone in the church, even up until the time it was like 800 people. She knew everyone's name, what their family story was. She loved and cared for that congregation. She was like Grandma Shirley to everyone in the church. And Judy Swanson, who was the choir singing gal. We didn't have a choir, but what I found out was she was a Six Sigma trainer for vice presidents and consultant to presidents at Caterpillar. She led some of the most major change initiatives that Caterpillar implemented.
That'll do.
That'll do, right?
That'll do.
She was in the room, but I didn't know that when I first met her, right? It took me like a year to uncover that. Laura and Adam Legacy, this couple that didn't serve anywhere, he became the treasurer of the church, and they just served nonstop in the church plant. They just were so far away from where they lived that they couldn't serve because they had like a 30-minute drive. But once we got the church to where they lived, closer to where they lived, they served like crazy, right? Sometimes people just need some proximity. The youth guys, right? The clowns that were in the back of the room laughing that night. Jake Smith, and Sam Deaver both did internships with me at the church plant. Jake is now an ordained elder in the Church of the Nazarene and runs all the tech ministries for Pekin First, which is now a church of 1,200. Sam now leads worship at one of our church, helps lead worship at one of our church plants down here in Florida, and did inner city, work and education with at-risk students in Chicago, and then relocated down to Tampa a few years back, and serves really faithfully in his church there. And they were clown junior high kids at the time that just didn't want to go to Sunday night service. And I just want to say, we got to be careful not to judge what we see on the surface, and not to be so quick to think like, okay, I got to have this person and this person and this person on my launch team. No, you need the people that God brings you, and God is going to do a work there and use every single one of them in a really powerful way.
That's one of the best stories I've ever heard. That's so great.
Yeah.
Man,
church planning, man, it's where it's at. So it's not just about reaching lost people. It's about empowering the people of God to live into the work of God, right? The good works for which they were created in Christ Jesus. That's a big part of it. And I love traditional church. I love established church, but once a church is established, it tends to have all of its roles kind of filled and can block people from development and not give them opportunity. Whereas in a church plant, you get this opportunity to develop leaders, and you have all this need. And so you kind of have to develop people, right? So it's really good on both fronts. You get to reach lost people and you get to develop people.
So I'm not trying to jump around, but when you ended up moving then to, it wasn't New Life, it was Medford, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This was a legacy church.
Yeah, it's like a 93-year-old legacy church. I just went back and celebrated their 100th anniversary earlier this year. Yeah. That's
awesome. How many people were there when you first got called?
The congregation was about 800 people.
Okay.
When we got there. Yep. Incredible church. BridgeWay was about 450, 500, I think, about 500 when we got called. And it had been through like 13 locations. I mean, we've met under the tree in the park. Like, we never canceled church. Even if we couldn't get into a facility, we go meet outside, man. There was no like, we're not going to do this. No, you better believe we're having church this weekend. We met in movie theaters, met in high schools, junior high schools, hotel conference centers, city conference centers, county conference centers, and just all over the place. It was great. So when we got to Medford, well, let me just tell you how we got to Medford. That's kind of an interesting story. BridgeWay had been portable for like its first 9 years. Lots of setup and tear down, which I think setup and tear down matters. I learned in that setting that sweat is the juice of unity, right? You get people working together and serving together on a common purpose. Like, you got a lot of unity. If you get people talking about what you should do, you get a lot of conflict. But if you just get them doing something together, really simple, you get unity. That's good. Pastors too often try to get this big dream plan together and get agreement. Man, that's really hard. Like, that's a lot of hard. But if you get them together on a small, tangible goal, right? We're going to pull this event off, or we're going to implement this ministry, and we're going to work on it together. You get unity around that, and then you can use that momentum to create further unity on future projects and kind of build that momentum.
That's really helpful. That's great to hear. Wow.
So I learned that in Setup and Teardown Church. And finally, we bought a building. It was like it wasn't Circuit City, but think like Circuit City, okay? Like an old electronics store that went out of business, had been vacant for probably 7-8 years. Been vacant a long time. On the second busiest intersection in the county.
That'll do. Okay.
Yeah. Second busiest intersection in the county. Our neighbors were Menards and Sonic and Walmart and Applebee's. Those were our neighbors.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah, it's great. The property was like 1.2 million. And we had like 100,000 in the bank. I mean, we were reaching, it was 83% of people that came to the church had not attended any church prior to coming.
83%?
Uh-huh. Yeah, we were reaching, like, Christians did not, what we did offended Christians. We did church in a way that offended Christians. I mean, it was like using AC/DC to open up a sermon, it's stuff like every time we started to get too many Christians in the church, we would do something to offend a few Christians so that you know, we could work with people that really didn't have a background in the church.
That's great.
Now I wouldn't recommend that in an established church, but in a church plant, it like
works, yeah.
we didn't want to steal from other churches. Like our goal was to reach people disconnected from the church, or maybe had church memory, but had given up on the church or given up on God.
Sure.
Right. So we were kind of strategic in how we did that. Anyway, we didn't have a lot of money, like doing this thing on a shoestring. Like there was 2 pastors full-time for a church of 500 people. That was it. Everyone else was like part-time stipended or volunteer. This property was like 1.2, been on the market a long time. We made them an offer at like 400,000 and they took it, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were able to renovate it. It was a poor renovation. We didn't have a lot of money, but enough that we could get into it. About that time, quick story. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place on this, but this is fun.
Please, this is right. It's called the Everywhere Podcast, so go for it.
Oh, good. So one other building story at BridgeWay. So in like the second or third year, I think it was right around the 2.5 year, 2.5 years old, we were looking for a building. We were so tired of set up and tear down. And we'd gotten into a partnership with a church in town that was building a new building. We were going to buy their old building. And we're going to buy it for $400,000. It's 70,000 square foot building, great building. Yeah. Super excited. We had the agreement. We were all excited. We were at the Acts 2 conference at Willow Creek with our leadership team. And we were planning on the next Sunday to launch a capital campaign to raise funds to start going towards this initiative, right? Buy this building. I had the drawings, everything together, like to cast the vision, right? And on the Friday night coming back from Acts 2 conference, at like 11 o'clock at night, I get a phone call from the secretary of the other church. And they say, I hate to call you on this so you're late, but we need to let you know, we have decided to rescind our letter of intent with you. And we are going to sell the church to the school district because they need school district offices.
Oh.
I'm like, I got, at the time it was probably 200 people. I got 200 people. I got to go tell. Like, we don't have a building when we thought we had a building. And I've got this capital campaign. I'm trying to raise funds for a building. What are we going to do?
I got plans. I got plans.
I got my plans. And so we called our leadership team together on Saturday and said, what are we going to do? And so we prayed. That's a good thing to do when you don't know what to do. And so we prayed. And the word that the Lord gave us was, I never wanted you to be about property. I always wanted you to be about people. I'm doing this so you don't get your gaze fixed on property.
Ooh, that's good.
And if you'll reach people, I'll take care of the property.
There you go.
And we heard that clearly. And so the next Sunday, the next day I stand up, and that night I worked all into the evening. And instead of showing them images of a building, I showed them images. We'd just done an initiative in our children's ministry where we'd taken pictures of all the kids and, gotten all the writers and all that, but taking pictures of all the kids and had like adopt a kid to pray for them for the year strategy, put them on your fridge, and pray for them throughout the year. So we had all these kids' pictures. And so, as I'm casting vision for this, I just stood up and said, typically you would show you a picture of a building here for this campaign. And I said, but I'm going to show you a picture of something better than a building. And I showed him a picture of a kid's face, and then another kid's face, and another kid's face. And it just kept multiplying out until like the screen was filled with all the kids in our ministry. And I said, that's what we're raising money for. That's not for a building, but for people. And if we'll be about people, God will take care of the property. And that became kind of a motto for us, for the church. And I think God blessed it and honored it because we never let our gaze get focused on property. It was always on people. And even now, as a superintendent, when I meet with churches, I can't tell you how often they're focused on a property and they think a property is going to solve their problem. And I'm sorry, property is more problem. It doesn't solve problems. 100%. Sorry, it doesn't. I know you think it does. It doesn't. The thing that'll solve your problem is you get passionate about reaching lost people. That'll solve your problem. Almost every time. So anyway, that was our heartbeat going to Medford, was reaching unchurched, de-churched, those that were disconnected from the church. And we got BridgeWay into a property, right? And that created some stability. I don't think I could have left until we got them into a building. And I thought I might pastor there my whole life. but I was at a prayer retreat. I do like an annual prayer retreat between December and January every year, take a couple of days to pray. And I do it quarterly, but I really do it in depth for a couple of days, like prayer, fasting, like, what did I learn this past year? What do I need to learn in the year ahead? What are my goals for the year ahead? How am I going to grow in the year ahead? All those kind of things, what I need to focus my attention on. And when I got into the section on calling and ministry goals, it was like the Holy Spirit said, Dale, I'm moving you this year. And we had prayed, Steph and I had a prayer partnership that we prayed, God protect us from phone calls. No, like legit. Like, I mean, it's funny, but we literally, God, because they mess you up, right? Phone calls mess you up.
Sure.
And we prayed, God protect us from phone calls. And for 9.5 years at BridgeWay, we did not receive one phone call to consider any assignment anywhere. Now, I think it's because my DS was jamming them up.
There you go.
Oh, Crawford Howe, best DS ever. And he's passed now. Incredible mentor. But he was so supportive of us and helped us to get what needed to happen done there. No district support, no financial support. It was just, you do it. Until like year 5. Year 5, we did a residency to plant a second campus, and they came in with some support to help us plant a campus.
Okay.
But in the startup phase, there wasn't support. It came out of the local church and tithes and offerings. Anyway, I came home from that prayer retreat, and I told Steph, I said, Steph, I think the Lord just told me that we might be moving. And she starts crying. She says, yeah, I think that may be the case too. And I said, I don't love that. I'm not excited about that. I'm excited about what God's doing here. And I said, well, how are we going to know this? And we agreed that we had prayed, God protect us from phone calls. And we hadn't had one. So it seems to have been effective prayer. And so we changed our prayer. We said, God, if this is from you, let us get a phone call. And let it be, and we had a timeline on. Our oldest daughter was a senior in high school. We said, let it be before Helena starts college at Olivet in the fall. So that's like 9 months. I mean, plenty of time for a call. And no calls, no call. And we get 2 days before she's going to college. And Steph and I are out for a walk in the morning around the neighborhood. And I looked at her and I said, well, I guess we read that one wrong. And she says, yeah, I guess so. I said, well, I'm good with 10 more years here. How about you? And she said, yeah, I'm good for that. Like, I like where I'm at. And I said, great. And so I thought we'd settled it.
Yeah.
I thought, hey, this is it. So the next day, the day before we're taking her to college, we're at Walmart shopping, doing some last minute stuff for Helena. And I get a phone call from Oregon. And I'm like, Oregon? That's a telemarketer. Send it to voicemail, And we get done shopping, get out of the car, and it was Stan Reeder. Dr. Reeder was calling. And he says, Reverend Schaeffer, this is Stanley Reeder calling you from the Oregon Pacific District today. And I got a church I'd like to talk to you about. Give me a call. So I called him back, and I just said, I said to him, I said, now, Dr. Reeder, if you had called me tomorrow, I would have said no. But you called me today, and so I've been waiting for your call. Let's talk.
Wow. Oh, it's so cool.
So anyway, now here's the background. I didn't know this. He and his wife were getting ready to go on vacation. And he was getting ready to go. And Janet had asked him, hey, are you going to call that Dale Schaeffer guy before we go? And he says, no, I think I'll call him when we get back. And she says, no, I think you need to call him.
Oh my gosh.
And so here's another thing, like, listen to your spouse, people.
Yes.
Listen to your spouse.
That's so
anyway,
great.
So he called me because she told him to. And when he called, I asked him, I was like, hey, my number one question is, does the church pay their budgets? Like, particularly, do they pay their missions budget? And my reasoning was, if a church doesn't pay its missions budget, that means they live close-handed. They don't trust God. And I wasn't going to go to a church that didn't trust God. And so when he said, yeah, they do, I'm like, okay, well, let's talk.
Wow. And you had that question even for, at the time, an 800 member church.
Yeah. I didn't know the church. I didn't know the church. He just called me about it. I didn't know what it was.
Oh, you had no idea who it was or anything.
I had no
Okay.
idea who it
That was
was.
right off the bat. Okay.
I didn't know where it was or what it was. I just said, I want to talk to you about a church. And I just said, well, first, before you get anywhere about it, do they pay their budgets? I don't want to know where it is because I don't want to be tempted by size or budget or any of that. I just wanted to know, are they missional? Are they a missional church or not? Because that would help. And anyway, he did, and we got to talking. And they were ready. They said, every church says that they're ready to reach their community, right? They're ready to make a pivot to, go deep and wide. They've been reading Deep and Wide by Andy Stanley during their transition time. They had a great interim pastor, Bobby Huffaker, who was the guy that really built Grove City Church, did the interim there and had helped prepare them. But they had a staff member who was an associate pastor, their operations pastor, Larry Knight, who had encouraged them as a board to read Deep and Wide during the transition. And I believe that was the critical thing that pivoted the thinking of that board to embrace a model of ministry for people that are not yet Christians. I think I really believe God used Larry to get that done. And the board was receptive to it. Like the Spirit did something through that. They reframed their imagination of what the church should be. And when they interviewed us, Steph and I did everything we could to scare them off. It was like, you're probably going to lose 200 people, and you're probably going to lose $250,000 if you call a rock and roll church planner into this established legacy church. Do you really want to do that? Yeah. And they went for it. They went for it and said, yeah, we'll call you. And the thing that got it done there was they had a board that was supportive. This wasn't a board that just says, yeah, we want to change and then bails on you, 6 months in. This was a board that had our back. And when congregants would start to go sideways or, tear down the pastor or complain about where we're going or what we're doing music wise or mission wise, they had our back. And you can't lead revitalization effort without a board that has your back.
It's interesting to me because I don't know why it had never occurred to me before, but you would think at the time an 800 member church that the word revitalization would not be something that they would need to be grappling with. But church size doesn't really matter in that case, I guess.
No, and they wouldn't have, they wouldn't have used revitalization, and I didn't use the word revitalization. It was a situation. There's a Harvard Business Review book called it's like your first 90 days. And it's a phenomenal book. And in it, he talks about the need to define the leadership situation so that you can pace change according to the leadership situation. And he says that every organization has one of 5 leadership situations. One is a startup, right? Like a church plant, right? And that takes really aggressive, very directional leadership, right? You got to be in control and tell people what to do.
Right.
And then there's a turnaround, right? Everything's crashing and burning right now. It's legitimately crashing and burning. It needs a turnaround. Like, this is going to die. You need heroic leadership there too, right? In a startup and in a turnaround, you need heroic leadership. You can't lead by committee. You can't lead slow. It's got to be fast. Otherwise you don't have time. Right. And that was what I'd done my whole ministry, was that kind of model of ministry. The third kind of situation would be like a sustaining success situation. And that's where things are up and to the right and you just don't want to mess it up.
Sure.
And you got to be really careful what you change, and you don't want to change much, because any change, like Andy Stanley says it well, he says, if you don't know what's working and why it's working, you can really mess things up quick. So you gotta only know not what's wrong in your church, but you got to know what's right in your church and why it's right.
Right. And
so if you change things quickly, you get in real trouble. So you got to have this very kind of like learner posture to sustain success, and someone that probably knows the culture a little bit to do that. The fourth one, and there's a fifth one, and that's accelerated growth. Very few things are in that, but an accelerated growth situation is different than like a sustaining success, because you've got to be really systems minded, and like, how do you build a system to continue to scale and support the growth?
Sure.
But the fifth situation, and it's where Medford was, and it's where a lot of churches have been, and that's a realignment.
Oh, okay.
That's a realignment. That's where it's plateaued or in a gradual kind of 1% to 2% a year decline.
Right.
And that's where Medford was. They were in a realignment. They'd kind of had some growth over the last 10 years, but they knew they needed to realign. They kind of plateaued. And to lead in a realignment, you can't do heroic leadership. You can't say, hey, this is what it's going to be, and this is where we're going. You've got to do a lot of listening, and you got to try to figure out like what's working and what's not working. It's diagnosis and intervention. It's adaptive leadership. It's where most of the church is at right now, is in that space of realignment. And so to lead a revitalization realignment, I learned a lot in Medford. I didn't come in knowing how to do it. So Medford taught me how to do adaptive leadership. I knew the basic principles of adaptive leadership from the church plant, because we had to do some of that there, but I didn't know how to pace change for an established organization. And that's what I learned in Medford. So how do you create missional momentum, right? How do you get momentum going enough to like create a health and excitement about the future for the church, so that there's good morale in the church, so that you can sustain the losses that come as you realign the parts that need to change, but people still love.
Yeah.
So there's kind of those two pieces to leading a realignment. There's the create and sustain missional momentum in exciting new ways, or leveraging good things that are working, while maintaining enough morale that you can deal with the pain of the losses that come from getting rid of ministries that are no longer producing the fruit they used to produce.
Wow.
So that's kind of what Medford was. A great church that had a long history of church planting in its past, planting churches internationally, sending work and witness trips, community partnerships and global partnerships. There were a lot of really good bones there around mission, and that DNA really helped in creating some momentum there. So like one of the first things that we did that really helped was the first weekend we did an initiative. First weekend we canceled church, so that really helped.
What? Hold on, what?
So this is great, man. I'm sorry, like this is going too long, and I just tell too many stories.
Absolutely not. I love this. This is the best.
Okay. All right, man. So my last Sunday at BridgeWay, there was a natural disaster. There was a tornado that hit.
Oh, wow.
I'm preaching at BridgeWay, and I'm preaching on Elijah and Elisha, right? And how Elisha wasn't going to be like Elijah, but he was going to be like Elijah, right? Like, but not the same. Right. And that whoever the next leader was here was going to be like, but not the same. They were going to have the same missional heartbeat, but not the same temperament, not the same relational kind of temperament. Just be different, like, but not the same. And I preached on how Elijah went away in a whirlwind.
Oh, my word.
And I said, in Illinois, you should never say this. I said, wouldn't it be cool to go away in a whirlwind? In the first service.
Dude.
And then 30 minutes later, there's tornado warnings going off in town. And the Washington tornado is what it became known as. You can Google it and find it. Came through town like half a mile from the church. And so we had to cancel our second service on my last Sunday at the church, because we were all taking shelter in the hallways and restrooms because the tornado was coming through town. So that's my last Sunday in Pekin.
Okay.
And my first Sunday in Oregon, we're moving across the country, and we had snow in Illinois. One of the board members, I'd taken a picture of our stuff loaded up, and it had a picture of a snowblower on it. And one of the members from the church that's on the board sent me a message and says, "Oh, Pastor, you're not going to need that out here. It doesn't snow in the valley. We never get snow."
Mm.
on the mountains, but not in the valley. Sure enough, my first weekend there, they got 6 inches of snow. And so I called the operations pastor and I said, "Hey, Larry, like what are we doing to plow the lot for this weekend so we're ready for church?" And he says, "Oh, we don't have snow plows here."
Yeah, that's not a thing. Yeah.
So my first weekend at Medford, we canceled because of a mini blizzard that came through.
Oh, Pastor Dale.
So that's how you revitalize a church, is you cancel church the first weekend.
That's how you do it.
Anyway, that's a fun story. And yeah, I don't know. What can I tell you about Medford and revitalization?
So, well, yeah, I mean, what's some of the, I think every church, whether you're 800 or like we are here 100, or so, there's those, you talked about the DNA, those bones, there's catalytic moments that happen. What are some of those things that you saw in Medford that really
that did that?
Those moments.
Yeah, and I would say there were some moments, but most of it was just consistency and the systems that support that. So, I mean, one, we created momentum early by doing a strategy called Bless the Valley. And so we were in the Rogue Valley and did a reverse offering. Like my second week at the church, the board trusted me enough to give away $10,000 to the congregation. And so rather than receive an offering, we gave an offering to people that were in church that weekend.
Whoa. Time out. Say what? I've never heard of that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll chat that up. So first thing, let me say this. First thing that we did coming in was I wrote a personal letter to the congregation, inviting them all to come to church on my first Sunday. Right. Mm-hmm. And everyone in the database, like, let's get them there. And then also on that first Sunday at the church, I had a card that I learned this from Scott Daniels in his book, Your First 100 Days. He says, get a card and call it Info for Pastor card. And then have them tell you about their family on the card. And so I did. And then we sat down with our staff and we went through all the cards. So we had like 1,000 people that weekend, and we took all those cards and we went through them and we said, who's a regular attender here that's been plugged in during the transition? Who's someone that was a guest this weekend? Put them in a different pile. Who's someone who has been attending but is maybe at risk of not attending anymore that, the staff knows about? Who's someone that's fallen away in the interim and came back? We sent a thank you to everyone, like a form letter to everyone that was in the regular attender group, everyone that was a guest, everyone that was at risk, and everyone that had fallen away. I personally called that week and thanked them for coming and heard their story and prayed for them. Most of them were back the next week.
Awesome. Okay.
Right. And then everyone else that came that first Sunday, over the next 2 months, I gave a personal phone call to make a touch with them and to pray for their family.
Nice. So
I spent a lot of time on the phone for like the first 2 months. But by the time the 2 months was done, I had talked to almost everyone in the church. And that created some connection, and it gave me a chance to listen to their family story, what they thought about the church. And I learned a lot during that time. So the second weekend, so that created some momentum for us. And then the second weekend, we did this reverse offering, right? The Bless the Valley offering. And so we took envelopes, filled them with 5s, 10s, 20s, and a few 50s and some 100s. And like $10,000 broken up that way, right? And one of the things I wanted to do was to remind the church that you're the church, we exist for the world, and that we all have something to be responsible and a steward for, right? We're going to activate this whole church for God's mission. And I wanted people to think through, okay, I've got something, what do I do with it? So we, at the end of the service, said, hey, we're not going to receive an offering today. We're going to give an offering. And it's not for you, it's for someone else. We just don't know who it is. And you're going to need to pray and seek what God has to say to you about who this needs to go to and what you need to do with it. And then we want you to tell us the story of what you did. And so they got their offering. Some of them got, $5, some of them got 10, some got 20, most everyone got 5, and then we just said, hey, tell us what you did. Right. and people did amazing things. Like some people took it and made cookies and then gave cookies out to their neighborhood. One girl made cookies and she sold the cookies and then took the money and then used that money to bless people. So she like quadrupled her money, took her $20 and made it $80 or whatever. Those were really cool stories, but it just got the imagination of people going. And then every week for the next month, we would tell the stories of what people did as a part of the sermon.
I've never heard of that. That is awesome.
It was cool. It wasn't original with me. I don't remember where I heard it. I heard someone do it. They didn't do it exactly like we did it, but it was cool.
That's a great idea. That'd be a great thing to do, especially during like Thanksgiving time frame or something.
Right.
That'd be what a fantastic. Wow.
Well, and it catalyzed missional imagination in people. I mean,
I'm sure.
I can't think of anything else we've ever done that catalyzed missional imagination like that.
That's the best. You're sending so many messages when you do that too. You're sending it's clearly a shift in thinking. It's clearly a missional mind. It's also the people utilizing the resources they have been given and gifts that they are then using for the blessing of others. That's really good. That's smart.
Yeah, I like
your reverse tithe and everything in you kind of goes, wait a second.
Right. Yeah. That's it. And it was good. Yeah, it was great. The other thing that kind of early on that we did was I preached a sermon on Mark 2. And as a part of an outreach series leading into Easter, like my first year, I did a sermon called Tearing Off the Roof. And we bought a bunch of shingles, like wood shingles, like wood shake shingles,
Yeah.
And cedar. They were made of cedar, and had them on the altar. And I preached a sermon on Mark 2, talking about who you're going to tear the roof off for, right, to get them to Jesus.
Nice.
And then had people come forward and write down the name or the group of people that they felt compelled by the Spirit to help get to Jesus. Like that was their calling, was to get these people to Jesus. And then we had them leave those at the altar, and we built a wall in the lobby. So the first thing you would see when you came into the church was this wall of shingles, and on it was all the names and all the kinds of people that we were called to reach and help meet Jesus, right? And so for like 6 months, this wall was in the lobby. And it just reminded people, like, we are tearing the roof off to get these people to Jesus.
That is such a great idea. Wow,
that really helped. Now, the bad thing that I didn't realize at the time was that some people have cedar allergies.
Oh no.
I almost killed our administrative assistant because she had a cedar allergy, and she went into like anaphylactic shock kind of around the thing. And so don't do that. But
don't use cedar.
Okay, but cool story tied to that. One of the gals that came forward and her family, Tony and Stephanie, they came forward and they said, we're going to tear the roof off for addicts and people dealing with addiction. They had this huge heart for it. And that moment became the pivotal moment for them. And over the next 4 years, they began doing everything they could to get people dealing with addiction to Jesus. And out of that, they launched a nonprofit called Reclaiming Lives, and launched a ministry called Recovery Cafe downtown, got funding from Microsoft. I mean, like millions of dollars to be able to do this thing. And now it's like this thriving. Google Recovery Cafe Medford, you'll find it. But that all got catalyzed kind of at the altar that day on the tearing off the roof thing.
That's the best.
Yeah. And that's, I think, revitalization. If revitalization is about your church being revitalized and not the people of your church being revitalized for God's mission, you're missing the point.
That's good. Yep.
Like the goal is never to revitalize the church. It's always to revitalize the people of God, right? It's not the organization that needs revitalization. It's the people that need revival. And the way you do that is you get them on mission, you get them praying, you get them listening to the Spirit, you get them walking in obedience and taking action on what the Spirit says. And that leads to revitalization in the church, and it leads to revitalization in a community.
That's powerful. All right. So, oh my gosh, we may have to have a whole separate podcast just on stuff like that. That's really great. I met you as a DS. I was new to the District of Florida myself, and I think I've been there for year or two or whatever. But either way, what did you ever see yourself as a DS? How did that come about? Like, what was that?
Yeah, no, this is like the last thing. Well, first of all, call to ministry. The last thing I wanted to do was be a pastor. The last thing I wanted to do was be a pastor in an established church. The last thing I wanted to do, I was anti-institution. So the last thing I wanted to do was be in any kind of leadership role that was tied to institution. My background was like punk rock. That was my scene. So like, this is not it. So like, it's just the church has called us to this work. And I gave God my yes to not only his work, but to the work of the church. And when I was ordained in the Church of the Nazarene, I felt like I gave the Church of the Nazarene my yes. And so if the church calls me to do it, then I'll do it. It may not be that I want to necessarily do the work. In fact, maybe most days I would rather be a pastor in a church plant than do what I do. Not because I don't find joy in serving the Lord. It's just, I love pastoring. I've really enjoyed pastoring. I love the people of God. But felt like when we were ordained that I gave my yes to whatever the church would call us to do. So that's kind of how this all happened and came together. And there's some background on it, like how we ended up in Florida. But yeah, the Lord called us here.
What's it been like so far? I mean, you've been DS in Florida for how long?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. What's
but
been
in a pandemic, so who knows what? I mean, I'm not sure what I'm doing. Am I DSing? Am I, just helping navigate through a pandemic? I don't know. I'm just trying to do it in my own skin and not anyone else's skin. And I think that's really important in ministry, right? Don't try to be someone else, be yourself. Like Dr. Larry Dennis was the prior DS here, incredible superintendent. Oh my word. Like great, like he has incredible relational skills and like encouragement skills and and I got nunchuck skills. That's what I do. I just don't have that same skill set. My skills tend to be a little bit more like administrative, systems based skills, kind of on the strategic side of things. My soft skills are not as strong as some superintendents. But I think for this time in this season, the Lord's called us to this work. And I'm grateful to get to serve the church. So yeah, it's interesting. It's not a pastoral role. Sometimes people say that the superintendent is like a pastor to pastors, right?
I've heard that.
Yeah, and I've heard that model. I don't see that in the manual as what is described to be. Two of the 5 roles in the job description are around like theology and ensuring that the theology of the church is biblical and in harmony with the polity of the Church of the Nazarene. So that's a priority, is encouraging good theology in the church. One of them is around church planting, and so catalyzing church plants, and that's a heartbeat of mine. And so we've done a lot of church planting since I've been here, and so I think I'm giving a lot of attention to that. I try to encourage good theology, and then revitalization or like missional improvement in the church. So how do churches improve what they do? That's in the manual as to what I do in the work. And so we do a lot in that area on how do we help churches to be more effective. So I try to follow what the manual says the role should be, but it doesn't say pastor to pastors. Someone, I can't remember who I was talking to. Someone was talking about how the superintendent was there to help pastors. And certainly I'm a resource to pastors, but the manual is pretty clear that I have the same obligation to a church that I have to a pastor. So while I'm the only superintendent that a pastor has when they're an elder on this district, I'm also the only superintendent that the church has on this district. And so I've got a responsibility to both parties here. I'm not just in the, like when I meet with the board, I've got to remind them, like sometimes they think I'm like in the back pocket of the pastor, right?
Oh, right.
That's not it either, right? I'm here to help you discern what needs to happen here.
Wow. Okay.
And encourage you to work together, like encourage pastors and boards. if I could say like one thing that I think is really, I guess a couple of things I think are really important in this work. One is breaking down the lay clergy divide.
Mm,
I think it's really important in this work.
that's huge.
Building leadership teams that look like laity and clergy working together collaboratively,
Mhm.
and not there's a lot of teaching around like churches being staff led rather than board led.
Sure.
And as a young pastor, I used to think, well, staff led means that staff call all the shots and determine what happens, but that's not true. A board determines the ends
Mm,
of the church, the high level goals in collaboration with the staff together as a leadership team. They should have a meeting every year to clarify the end goals that they have together. Then how you get to those goals gets delegated to staff who could be lay or clergy who work together. The board doesn't interfere, but at some church sizes, they may participate.
mhm.
They collaborate on how are we going to work together to get to those ends.
Wow.
But it has to be collaborative. And if there's not good collaboration between the pastor or the pastoral staff and the board, you get conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So you without collaboration, you get conflict. And it's not healthy conflict. Collaboration always has some element of conflict to it. And
Sure.
so we can tend to move away from it, but you get really big conflict if you don't embrace the small conflicts that are required of collaboration. So like encouraging churches to work together between clergy and laity. Then, the second thing that I really think is prioritizing evangelism and church planting, right? Reaching lost people, making people the priority, not property the priority. Getting them to do real work and not in adaptive leadership. There's talking about like false work. It's non-productive work. It's when we think we're working. It's all the meetings that we have that we never act on, right?
Yep.
Getting them to do the real work of the church. So have the meeting and then actually execute against it. I think that's an important part of the work. Helping encourage healthy conflict management in the local church. So much of this role is coming alongside of churches and helping them with conflict resolution and management.
Wow.
Yeah. So evangelism, church planting, conflict resolution management. How do they work collaboratively together to create healthy systems for sustaining missional effectiveness of the church, not the ongoing life of the church, the missional effectiveness of the people of God in that place. I'd say those are pretty high. And then, of course, the theological importance of ensuring alignment theologically.
Nice. So in kind of wrapping some things up, where do you see from your perspective, doesn't necessarily have to be even from just an American perspective, but just overall, what are you seeing on the ground when you see like the future of the church? What are some of what's the future look like to you?
Yeah. I think there will continue to be a collecting of cultural Christians into large churches that can provide the felt needs of cultural Christians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to continue to see the shrinking of mid-sized churches and the growth of large churches until you basically have a bunch of big box churches, and the mom and pops are really struggling to sustain in a way that financially allows for a full-time minister.
Mm.
Right. That's gonna the ability for full-time ministry in churches that are 30 to 70 it's just gonna go away. It's gonna be very, very difficult. Then I think you're gonna see that bivocational kind of shift, co-vocational ministry will be catalyzed. You'll see more and more of that. I think storefront churches and house churches will make a resurgence. I really do. I think we're going to see that. Third space churches, fresh expressions of church, right? Churches where you live, work, and play. I think that's going to become more and more prominent. We've got a church planner here right now that's going to do a large launch in the future, but is doing house church, and they've baptized more people in their house church than they have in an established church, right? So I think that kind of thing is going to become more and more prevalent and more important. I hope that there is a continuing decrease of the lay clergy divide.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it will happen. I really do. The professionalization of ministry is I think it's on the decline. And I don't think you're going to bring that back to the levels it was when the evangelical industrial complex was demanding we crank out professional pastors to pastor churches of 200 plus. I think that's just gonna go away. Yeah, I think those are some of the big shifts that I see.
Yeah, and for some, they may hear that and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know about that." I think it's really exciting. I think it's really exciting.
And it may be, and if you've got a call to ministry, you may say, well, they're like, I'm never going to find a job in ministry. Okay. I don't think I ever thought I was going to find a job in ministry. Right. I mean, our first, and I say I mean my family, right? I'm not like talking about myself in the third person. Our first 7 years in ministry were all bivocational.
Yeah.
Right. So it may be that a ministry opportunity opens up that enables you to make the pivot from bivocational to full-time vocational. But whatever that pivot is, it will probably cost a lot. And the question will be, can you afford to take that pivot? Yeah. So, and this is 20 years ago. We made that pivot 20 years ago. And I think at the time I was making around 40 a year in banking, and Steph was, I think, making 35 a year in banking. Now that's 20 years ago, right? So that's $75,000 household income. When we made the pivot to full-time ministry, it was, she didn't work. She stayed home with our newly born child. And the church paid me $17,000 a year in a parsonage. So at the time, that would be like a $15,000 pack. So $32,000. We went from 75 to 32,000 a year.
Yep.
To go into full-time ministry. And then I think I had $47,000 of educational debt at the time.
Oh my gosh.
So that's that. I don't say that to, like, it's not a pat on the back. It's only to say that if the idea is we're going to be in a full-time assignment that's going to pay a living wage, 55 to 75 a year, and that's going to be the first assignment, that's unlikely.
Yeah.
It's unlikely to happen. Right. And so that deprofessionalization has got to happen, because we're going to have everyone coming out with these professional degrees and $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 of debt. And the full-time assignments are not there to support that unless you go into staff at a large church.
Correct. Yep.
Right. And that's the place where you can find that kind of compensation, and you could go into a staff role and do that. So at some point we have to a little bit do some deprofessionalization and temper people's expectations that bivocational is what you're going to do. And if the Lord leads you to make the sacrifice to give up the additional income from the bivocational assignment to go into ministry full-time and take a 50% hit in order to do that, then that's great. Trust the Lord. He'll take care of that. But we're going to have to be okay with that. Otherwise, the pivot that will happen is what's happening in a lot of context right now, which is where, ministers who, especially in our denomination, can't find a full-time assignment that will meet the needs for carrying educational debt, all the support, then they'll make a move to denominations that have higher income per giving per week per attendee than the Church of the Nazarene, which has historically worked with an underprivileged kind of population, right? So they'll move into more educational, more affluent kind of denominations where there has been a more professionalized clergy for a long time, and the means are there to provide for that. But that also has a life cycle and will die. It's just got a longer tail because they've got higher income earning potential within those congregations. But it in the next 50 years is going to come to an end too.
Yeah, yes. I see. You're very well versed in a lot of that. I see it from a very, just like on the ground, looking at the future of just our own church here and other churches I've been a part of. And you're thinking, like, man, it's not just the shifts of reaching younger families and the loss and stuff. You're looking at the financial end, and you're looking at all the sustainabilities. You're looking at all the different factors, and the fact that churches need to continue to really learn how to equip the saints, and all those things mixed together. I see exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah. And then, in Florida, we've got an insurance crisis. I mean, an absolute insurance crisis, right? Both on the housing side of things, but on the church side of things, where insurers are no longer providing wind coverage, or water damage coverage to churches, and the deductibles are at 20% of your appraised value. And so, it's $250,000 to hit your deductible.
Wow. But
and you're paying, you're paying $25,000, $40,000, $70,000 a year just for insurance.
Well, I think a part of it long term for the overall church, there's the shift that needs to happen as far as and you've hinted at this all the way through. But one of the things that I've kind of been praying a lot about is, how do you help a church really deal with what the real mission is, dealing with real people, dealing not just in programs and all the kind of surface level, property and programs and all these things, but you're dealing with how do you actually help people come to know Jesus, equip the saints for the works of ministry, and help them move forward on mission in their lives. And that I see that surging along with a lot of these established things falling apart.
That's it. And there will be established churches that are able to do that effectively, and they can sustain a brick and mortar presence, right? But there'll be another group of churches, and I think a majority of churches, who will no longer be able to financially sustain a brick and mortar presence. And so the brick and mortar falls away, but the people should not fall away. Some will move into brick and mortars because they can't imagine any other establishment other than the brick and mortar. But there'll be others whose missional imagination is such that, and we'll have helped them to develop a missional imagination that is such that they can see the church existing outside of a property.
That's awesome. Man, thank you for your time, brother. I appreciate it so much. It means the world to me.
Thanks for the invite, man. This is a fun conversation to have.
It's the best. Thanks for checking out this podcast. I hope this interview was a blessing to you. Like, share, subscribe, and get the word out, and let's indeed follow Jesus everywhere.